You feeling stuck lately? Like life's passing you by? Get to know M.A.Y.A.
Acronym My Ambition, Your Ambition.
Reconnect with your dreams, your goals, your ambitions. Find your motivation and start to live the life you desire. Explore the M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition podcast at M.A.Y.A.Kai.com.
Namaste, everyone. Welcome to another episode of M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition, the podcast that looks at how to embrace the concept and the idea of mental wellness from a salient and fresh forward thinking perspective, because there's such a taboo to saying mental anything. And if you put health or wellness behind it, it tends to kind of throw people for a loop. So in my podcast, I try to focus it on ways to pull back that veil of self-doubt and self-sabotage that plagues so many of us in our lives, and to help you to identify the ambitions and harness the motivation to help you yield satisfaction and success in your daily lives. Remember, the overarching theme for 2021 is focusing on daily excellence, not just the idea of the best version of me in the long haul or happiness as a lofty goal, but as an everyday ambition. So, if you are a first-time listener or viewer, welcome aboard. Buckle up for safety, because occasionally it can get an unexpected bumpy ride in here and there. I may say something in a podcast that you've never considered, thought about, or have an aha moment, but it's always a safe space. Just know that. And of course, if you're a returning listener or viewer, well, then you pretty much know how things work here. I always say grab your pencil and pen, jot things down that may come up, because remember, we're doing this work through the process. Remember, the biggest rule with M.A.Y.A is you work at your own pace. So we're 47 episodes in. If you're still back on 35, because that's an episode that really sat with you and you need to do more work, then that's where you get to be. But if you're here right now, I always appreciate when people are front and center for every episode. Love the support. So I always say, grab a pencil and pen so you can jot down some things. Grab your beverage of choice. I'm caffeinating. I'm sure I'm doing more hydrating, but I guess it's partially hydrating. But I'm caffeinating, drinking some coffee today during the show. And hopefully I won't have the bump like I had last week, where I had, or a week ago, because I was not here last week. I was on vacation. Hopefully you can tell I got a little tan going. And had a dry throat, but I feel better now. Everything is good. So your beverage of choice, whether it's coffee, tea, it's 5 o'clock someplace. So wine, beer, whatever it is. You have listeners from around the world, which I really appreciate. People in Morocco and Switzerland and Russia. I was like, I'm just global, international. I love it. It works for me. So wherever you are, it doesn't matter. Grab your beverage of choice. Try to get that quiet spot, especially if you're doing this one-on-one, you're home. But if you're at work and you're just catching it, it's okay. Because remember, this is you and me time, but it's mainly you time. So with that next 60 minutes, we're going to focus on this. Try to get comfortable if you can. Like I said, find that space, grab something, and get ready to start the show. So we got to do our housekeeping stuff first. You know that, right? If you want to join the conversation, then you're always welcome to. You can comment on Facebook in the comment section or YouTube in the comment section, like someone just commented right now. A faithful and loyalist to the show, I love it, Roburn, who is in Hawaii. Aloha. Aloha, Miha. Checks into the show weekly and shares it, which I always appreciate. So just like Roburn, you can always just make a comment and then I can share it on the screen and share it with other people, especially if something resonates with you and you're like, I can connect with this because this is how I have kind of had this experience. I think people thrive and they grow in spaces when they feel like they're not alone, when there's people who've had similar experiences. It doesn't mean yours isn't unique, but you kind of know you have some company maybe in some areas where you've struggled. So this is how you can get interactive with the show, because technically it is live. So just comment Facebook and YouTube. I'll click on the comment. I'll read it for just the listeners. And of course, you can read it because it's there on screen. So that's how you get to participate in the show. Hopefully by now you're listening to episodes of M.A.Y.A via M.A.Y.A.Kai.com. Remember, every episode has podcast companions. So supplemental information that I want to share that I think can give the conversation more depth and breadth. So you can always go to M.A.Y.A.Kai.com, just click on the podcast resource section and just go to the episode and click. You can either read, occasionally I'll throw a video. Like there's a video for today that there's just one I used. I might add one more to kind of expand the conversation, that I think this is going to be very helpful for people. If you're watching via YouTube, I appreciate that. If not, make sure you subscribe, like, and share. Just go to search M.A.Y.A Kai. I say it every week. You're going to find a whole bunch of Japanese anime before you get to me. Just scroll down and you'll see my face. Click, like, share. I appreciate always the support. Of course, if you happen to have a podcast platform of choice, what I'm not going to do is criticize it, because I still love the support. So just make sure that you're subscribing via, whether it's iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Amazon Audible, Spotify, I'm a couple more that I'm not even all that familiar with, but I'm there. You can always just listen to podcasts there, but make sure you share, subscribe, and like either way. And by now, most people have gotten social with me, which I always appreciate. Just you can find me via Twitter and Instagram, Maya_Akai, Facebook, Maya Akai Presents. So those are all the ways that you can connect with the show and stay abreast of things that's going on. Hey, and you never know. You may have a conversation with someone and they're struggling with something, and you might just say, I listen to this show, Maya, My Ambition, Your Ambition. Like, she's your favorite neighborhood mental wellness advocate. Why don't you check out her show? And maybe after you do this a couple times, maybe you'll find the courage to go talk to someone in more detail. But I think the insight is pretty good that she gives. A little shameless self-promotion right there. Either way, I don't just say that. People have shared that with me, which makes me know what I'm doing is a worthy cause here. I know it's not sexy. I know it's not fantastic, but it's resourceful and it's necessary, especially in today's world, to take care of your mental wellness. So before we jump into episode 47, I'm going to put the toolbox time out there I do every single show, which is making sure you take your EI out on the table. Hopefully you already had it out before this show, because when you woke up this morning, the first thing you took out of your Maya toolbox was your emotional intelligence. If you're new to the show, that simply means the ability to perceive, evaluate, and control your emotions is really what EI is. It is the most important tool that we have in your toolbox. Use it all the time. Use it frequently. The only time you should put it away is when you go to sleep, and when you wake up, you take it out again. Because it's important to be able to perceive what's happening to you, to evaluate those emotions, and then to respond versus react. But EI goes beyond just you. It extends to others as well. It makes you more empathic when you really have a full understanding of what EI really is. So we got that toolbox moment out the way. And of course, another overarching theme, along with we're looking at things with daily approach to being the best version of ourselves and happiness, which then can be cumulative over time. We also have a quote that I feel like says it all. Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. Aristotle. Old wisdom, but it makes sense, because when you sit at center with yourself and you understand who you are, chances are you'll have better relationships with people, and you won't find yourself in such compromising situations because you've come to understand things that are important to you, i.e. those core values, which is an episode that I tell everyone to listen to because it's worth a listen. So, like I said, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. Aristotle figured it out however many hundreds and thousands of years ago, and it's something that we would best to really grasp. Now, before we jump into episode 47, let's open up Maya's mailbag. So if you remember, I mentioned that I was starting a new episode because people will reach out to me and send me email questions. So I decided, you know what, I kind of want to incorporate this more into the show. So I created what's called Maya's mailbag, which ultimately it's if an episode has got you thinking, reflecting on how to navigate a difficult situation, or you're feeling stuck, with getting to that best version of yourself, send me a virtual letter with your thoughts or questions, and then I will respond to the email, or I'll respond to on the show like I'm going to actually do today, or it might just actually be the focus of an episode. So how you can send me a virtual letter is send your email to getinspired@mayaakai.com. And that's how you can send me information, and I'll reach into my mailbag and maybe share it during the show, or I might respond directly. There's so many different ways I'm going to incorporate the input that people often give me when they listen to the show. So remember, if something really has got you thinking and you really want to engage me in deeper conversation with it, just send me a virtual letter to getinspired@mayaakai.com. Okay. So with that said, I'm going to actually pull a letter out the mailbag. Let me look at this. So this is interesting because this is actually related to episode 46. So I'm going to call this an episode 46 correspondence. What they pretty much said to me was, Maya, how long is too long to allow yourself to emotional marinate in a negative emotion? So as you remember, I kind of introduced emotional marinating as a Mayaism, something that I kind of coined within the show. And I thought, you know what, these things keep coming back up. So it's really worthy of me sharing you with this. So what emotional marinating ultimately is, it's when you stay in an emotion for an extended period of time and you soak in the thoughts and the feelings that it's made of, hence impacting often your behavior. Now, emotional marinating can be positive as well as it can be negative. So we talked in episode 46, in great length about what that meant for the positive and negative side. So let me just recap it a bit if you haven't gotten to episode 46. So that part about emotionally marinating, here's what's key about it. If it's positive emotional marinating, it means that's kind of when you have that good experience and you feel successful. I always say confident, sexy, whatever it might be that allows you to be immersed in a positive feeling and emotion. The outcome is an outward action. So I always tell people, get comfortable and get real familiar with emotional marinating, because we so often can cling to the negative things, but not pay attention to the things that make us feel really good about ourselves. We take those things for granted and we tend to table them. So when you're in a good moment and something's happening, ask yourself, I'm really enjoying this. Why? So you can get to know you better. This is where that self-talk comes in. So you can get really familiar about, when I'm working towards the best version of me, here are my high points. How can I create more of the high points on a daily basis, which becomes cumulative in the entirety of who I am as a person? Now, on the flip side, and a negative emotional marinade would be something that's bad or painful happens, and you feel sad, depressed, sometimes worthless, or disappointed in yourself. Those emotions often elicit negative thoughts and feelings. Hence, you manifest a negative mood or behavior from it. So you make a big mistake, and you say to yourself, I can't believe I did that. I totally knew better. That wasn't my intention. By the way, that word intention is going to come up a little bit later in the show because it's really important in this conversation. And you say to yourself, okay, most people will tell you that you have to live on the silver lining concept. And I'm going to tell you that's great, but you have to allow yourself that emotional space to really experience negative emotions because they have a point. Negative emotions' purpose is for self-evaluation and situational evaluation. So when something bad happens, you get to say, why does this make me feel this way? Whether someone elicited emotion or it's a situation, like, why did this situation make me feel this way? Like, why did it elicit anger from me? Why am I so disappointed in myself? You really take the time to really evaluate the situation or the emotion that's been elicited to figure out the source of it. So when you're marinating in it, it isn't to soak it in just to mope around and be sad, but we have to allow ourselves to know the breadth and depth of emotion. As there are highs in being happy and joyful and just all those great things, sunshine, rainbows, and unicorns, which we're still looking for, but we like to talk about them. We also know that life has its valleys as much as it has its peaks. And if you don't allow yourself to understand what happens when you're walking in the valley of the shadow of death, not to be extreme on it, you're not giving yourself the understanding of your full emotional range. But we don't sit in that negative emotional range for long periods. The purpose is for evaluation. Why do I feel this way? Why did this impact me this way? So then you know in the future, when you are working on your boundaries and limitations in situations or with people, it is that negative emotion that helps you to understand exactly where you're pump the brakes. I'm approaching a limit. Now, if I cross it, where do I stop before I've gone too far? There is a purpose with negative emotions. So when people don't let you take the time to be in them, it's actually not healthy. And that's what episode 46 was all about. So let's have a real talk time moment. We're going to have it in our mailbag. We're going to have like two in the show, one tied to the actual topic of the show, but as well as this mailbag moment. I'm going to ask you this. When something goes wrong, do you instantly go into victim or blame mode? Or do you step back and try to see the forest through the emotional trees? You often hear we have so many cliche sayings that actually have great meaning if you really sit down and dissect what they mean. So when people say you can't see the forest for the trees, and for a while people are like, well, the forest is the trees. No, the forest is the totality of the trees. But if you're only focused on certain trees, you don't see what's all fully in front of you. There may be a path that you're missing because you're looking at one particular tree that's taken your interest. Stepping back is seeing the entire picture. That's hence what can't see the forest for the trees means. You're not seeing the full picture because you're dialed into one specific detail. And details, as they say, the devil's in the details, is important. But don't get so drawn into the details that you can't see the bigger picture of something that's going on. So part of what I really want you to think about when we talk about that negative emotional marinating is ultimately when bad things happen to you, do you fall into victim and blame mode? Or do you just really step back and try to evaluate? This is where when your EI is high, you tend to step back and look at what's going on. So when you use the negative, here's what's important. Like I just said, use it to evaluate how you feel, why you feel that way. Remember, part of last week's episode about toxic positivity, which someone's like, never thought about it until you talked about it, but real talk, is to allow yourself to be in the moment, which is the emotions, the thoughts that are present. Don't try to curtail or ignore them. It's about being in the moment. So if you ask me how long you should stay in a negative emotional marinade. If a moment is short, that moment should be equally as short, but give yourself the space to evaluate the emotion. So make sure it's brief, just like a moment is brief, because you're using your emotional intelligence to perceive, to evaluate, and to control. See, that's the whole thing. You're getting preparing to respond opposed to react to the emotion that's been elicited, as well as you also be checking in on the emotions of others as much as you can without taking on the role of, oh, I'm going to read your mind. If you can't understand their words or actions of others that have put you in this compromising situation, it's necessary that you ask, but it's even more necessary that you put into perspective the meaning of relationships, because all relationships don't have equal value. So make sure you keep your emotional marinating. You keep it brief, because you're going to allow that emotional evaluation to happen, because that's the purpose of it, to help you work towards understanding the response you want to have and the way you want to have that aligns with the way you feel. That's the purpose of it. So it should be brief, because it's an evaluation period. It's not a, woe is me, this is not fair, I'm not happy, this is not right. That's not what we're looking to do when we're working in that emotional marinade that's negative. So short, brief, but it's an evaluation period, which still allows you to feel the emotion that you're currently in. Hopefully, to the person who sent me that virtual letter, that's helpful, and it kind of plays into what you didn't understand. So once again, if you too would like to throw a question out there based on an episode, you can contribute to Maya's mailbag as well. Just send me a virtual letter. If the episode makes you think or reflect on something, a situation, you can always send that virtual letter to getinspired@mayaacai.com. And like I said, I may just kind of speak to that particular question at the beginning of an episode, or I might make it an entire episode, or I might say, oh, this is interesting. Maybe I'll respond just to you. Either way, I appreciate the interactions that I get from people posing questions. Okay, so now that we've kind of gotten the virtual letter out the way, let's get into episode 47, Shine Bright, See Gaslighters. Now, this is interesting because most people are like, they've heard of gaslighting. It's based on a movie, actually, there's a couple different movies that have used this term to talk about it, but it's something that so frequently happens that I think people tend to lose sight of it. And the thing I want people to understand is part of working on that best version of you and managing that best version of you is putting tools into your toolbox that will help you to identify when people are working against your best interest. And gaslighting is something we are often aware of and probably have experienced, but never put a name to it and the disregard and disrespect that it is. Gaslighting is a type of psychological abuse, and I will also say sabotage, that a person tries to inflict or engage on another person with the intention of creating confusion and self-doubt to gain control so they can perpetuate their own personal interest, is what it comes down to. When you tune in this episode, we're going to really explore and understand what gaslighting is and how it can be truly detrimental to you getting to the best version of you. This is something to put into your tool, is understanding gaslighting. I can't tell you how important that it really is. Okay. So, as always, I always think it's important to put things in perspective. So, what is gaslighting? Because most people think they know what it is, and you're probably spot on or close to it. But you know me, I think everything in a conversation should have a framework. And so the framework of this is pretty straightforward. Gaslighting is a type of psychological abuse or sabotage, like I said before, that when people try to inflict or engage into another person with an intention of creating confusion, they want you to think that you start to doubt yourself, like, is that how that happened? Did I say that? What? I mean, you really start to question what is clearly reality and what has a truth based on what another person wants you to believe that your perception is wrong. Go back to the episode about perspective versus perception. So important to understand all these little tools I give you to put in your toolbox. So ultimately, that's what gaslighting is. I kind of introduced it a bit like before, but I want to say it again to make sure you fully understand this. So gaslighting is a type of psychological abuse. It's all a mind game. It's a mind F. You fill in the blanks. Seriously. It's abusive and often it's a sabotage that people try to inflict or to engage on another person with the intention of creating confusion or self-doubt to gain control so they can perpetuate their self-interest. Let that sink deep, because as we move through this episode, there's going to have a lot of meaning to that. Like, what does that really mean? And, you might start reflecting on, have I really ever been a victim of that? Well, let's have our second real talk time of the show. Understand this: gaslighting is very real. But it's important to distinguish if a person's behavior is unintentional or if they're being manipulative. Refusal to be open to someone's feelings, experiences, or issues because it's not what you want or agree with subliminally is gaslighting. I want you to know that. Be sure you aren't deploying this kind of behavior, because it's really important. So again, before you jump into thinking, oh, have I been gaslighted? Is it me? Has this happened? You first have to really determine what you believe the intention of the person is. Unintentional or intentional, because if it's intentional, then it's gaslighting. If it's unintentional, then they just might be in their own feelings. I'm in my feelings, and just kind of acting a certain way. But once we talk about the types of gaslighting, it will give more insight to you, helping you understand if you feel something's intentional or unintentional. Because when you see a pattern of behavior, and gaslighting can actually happen with people you don't know really well. It can often happen in the workplace. How many times have people been in a situation where something happens at work and someone acts like, no, that's not what happened. I didn't say that. You said, and you're like, whoa, I was there too. I'm fully aware of what happened. You need to stop that like right now. So when I talk about know the value of relationships, low, medium, high, which we get into a little later in the show, gaslighting can happen in very intimate, relationships, which often in domestic violence situations, gaslighting is a huge component of what happens in those abusive situations. But it can happen in let's just say in a workplace situation. You may have friendships that are like that. It kind of is a little bit of everywhere, but it's important that you know what it is and what it looks like. One thing I think is important for you to know about this is that nothing is absolute. And I tell people this all the time. We feel what we feel for a reason, but that applies to all parties involved. I always want people, when you're trying to determine if you think something is intentional or unintentional, when you're talking about gaslighting, just know nothing is absolute. You're not 100% always right in situations. You're not 100% wrong, but just know we feel what we feel for a reason. And that applies to the person who's challenging you on something. So you got to step back and say, okay, this is where your objectivity is huge. Is this an intentional thing or was it unintentional? But thinking in absolute parameters can be dangerous. I always warn people against it. 2, I just said it, being objective is key. Take out your toolbox, take out your objectivity, but you got to be willing to hear and to try to understand what is being presented. But I need you to ask yourself in that objectivity, is there truth in what is being saying? Be aware. Remember I said be aware and beware, but this is be aware that if it happened, how you might see the event versus how somebody else saw it is usually the center of the issue at hand. You might be like, what? And you're like, that's not how that happened, or that's not what I meant. But it doesn't mean you're seeing eye to eye on clearly you experienced the same, event or situation, but how you're both seeing it's entirely different. And this is where the conversation about outcomes and intentions are entirely different things, and they are not necessarily related, except for they're tied to an event. Know the difference between intention and outcome. And this is how you have to rationalize situations. This is another big toolbox thing. And this is why we're going to have our real first toolbox time of the show, because I think it's important to understand the difference between outcomes and intentions. So outcomes, we got to do our framework. We got to be literal about this. Outcomes are pretty simple. It's the way things turn out. It's a consequence, and it can be good or bad. So if something's good, then things tend to be thumbs up, everything's great, and the world's happy, and we're getting along. And if the consequence or the outcome is bad, then it's like, oh, we had a hiccup. What happened here? Whoa, wait a minute. This is not what I expected. Most people don't anticipate, or nor do they plan for, bad or negative consequences or outcomes in situations. You kind of get caught by surprise. This is why having objectivity and good emotional intelligence can help you to prepare for those unforeseen moments. I say it's always easy, though, because people can get you. They can get you because we're still human and we're very emotional in nature. On the flip side, when you talk about intention, it's carrying out an action where a thought or a feeling is determined A stance is taken ultimately that guides the words or behaviors exhibited related to that point of interest. So, you may be sharing, your intention is to talk about something that happened. I'm gonna give you a story of something recently that happened. And I've decided that I'm gonna go back to this person and have a conversation with it because I'm pretty sure I know what his intention was. There was no negative outcome, but I feel in a different situation it could have been. There's a person I work with who was very straightforward, shoot from the hip, cool guy, love him. We're having a conversation. He was talking about experience he had when he was doing a kind of a program to help him work back into a situation that he was getting out of to get into something better. And he was talking about some of the people who had guided the program and what the guy would say. And it was a derogative term. It was a racial term the guy would use no matter who was sitting in the room. And he was telling me the story, but he used the word. He didn't like abbreviate or beep. He used the word. And it was interesting because I wasn't offended because I know him as a person and I know he was just sharing the story in its authentic way. But I looked at the room of the other people who were in the room because it was a derogatory racial term towards Black people without me saying, oop, the N-word, which most people will substitute and not say out loud. I looked at the faces on the other people in the room who happened to not be Black. They were kind of like, oh, and I was like, okay, I noticed it. And he kept telling the story. He said it a couple times and I could tell the discomfort in the room. So we went out. But the thing is, I know the guy, the intention wasn't there. He was just telling the story. And I said, oh, that was a very Dave Chappelle moment is what I said, for you to be in that situation. He's like, when it happened, I didn't know how to feel about it. He was like, whoa, why would you say that? So he was really authentically telling me the story. I think I'm going to go back and tell him. I was okay with the story. I wasn't offended. But in other work situations, this is how bad things happen to people. Even though I know you weren't saying that to be offensive and you were just telling the story as it was, you might want to modify it. And don't say, I was just keeping it real, because keeping it real can get you fired. Because all it takes is one person being offended. And all of a sudden, they go to HR and report you for using something, even knowing contextually how you were saying it and who you weren't even talking to them. But we live in a world where political correctness is extremely important. So just know that. But that was the thing about outcomes and intentions. I know his intention was not bad, but an outcome could be different if I was a person that really would have got offended. In this case, it was nothing. But I do feel the need to kind of put him on notice just to be careful, because you don't know what might offend other people, even if you're good friends with them. And we're kind of work cool. We've never hung out outside of work, but at work, we're like bosom buddies. How people always joke and say I have a work wife or a work husband. He's like my work friend. We're super cool. And I love working with this person. And it makes my job easier and it always goes really well. And he's like a pure, good-hearted person. And I know his heart. So hence, I knew what he was just telling me as a story, but I know how things can go wrong. So I made a decision. I'm going to go back and chat with him about it because I think he should know. I want you to note something in this conversation about outcomes and intentions, because understanding this is another tool in your toolbox today. Besides just putting gaslighting in there, understanding gaslighting, I really need you to understand outcomes and intentions. Here's a big note on this conversation. You cannot control how someone may respond to your actions, behaviors, or words. Outcomes and intentions are independent of one another. So I think it's extremely important that when you're working with people or you're kind of going through things, know your audience. We frequently say that, in many situations, know your audience, be mindful of your words. But the key thing is, if you know your audience, you should feel like you can speak to things a certain way. So if you're in a middle ground area where you don't know everybody in the room, then maybe you should be mindful of what you say. If you feel you can be 100% authentic and true with someone, that's good. But just make sure that's the case so that you don't have what is no intention to do bad, but it turns out poorly because someone responded differently than you thought they would. So it's key just to know that. All right, this is the first half of the show. This is episode 47. Shine bright. See Gaslighters. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to have that conversation about what types of gaslighting there is. And then we'll wrap up the show with talking about, hey, this is how you can deal with it if you found that you have been exposed to this or you're dealing with this. I'm going to give you some things to consider and think about how you can deal with these situations. Because remember, I said, an ongoing situation that's continually based or focused this way self-sabotages you if you allow it to keep happening. When you let outside forces really influence you inside, it's dangerous. So we're going to get into the 6 types, and I even throw a bonus in there, of gaslighting, and then ways that you can navigate that. You're listening to My Ambition, Your Ambition, episode 47. Shine bright. See, Gaslighters. We'll take a quick break, everyone, and we'll be right back in just a moment.
Please stop and listen, because this important message may directly apply to you or someone dear to you. Several thousand African American former full-time CPS teachers were unfairly terminated starting in the mid-90s and continuing to the 2000s. If you are one of those many former CPS teachers who was unjustly terminated, or if you are the immediate relative of a now deceased unjustly terminated former CPS teacher, you may qualify to participate in a lawsuit at no upfront cost to you. Please call 773-580-7183 immediately for more information. That's 773-580-7183. Do not delay. Act today, because time is of the essence. That's 773-580-7183. 773-580-7183.
Stepping out of bed. It's easy to take for granted. You work, eat, play, sleep, and get out of bed the next morning. Seems simple. But if you're one of 25 million individuals in the United States living with major depression, sleep isn't always so easy. Neither is navigating your daily life free of guilt or hopelessness, or having the ability to enjoy time out with friends, make simple decisions, enjoy hobbies, or go to work. Major depression is the leading cause of disability across the United States, and without treatment, the frequency and severity of symptoms tend to increase over time. However, there is hope. Major depression is treatable, and there is no one-size-fits-all approach. Today, there are a variety of treatment options to choose from. The key is to get an evaluation and find a treatment plan that is right for you. Free education, information, and support programs are available. You are not alone. We can help.
I can't breathe. I have migraines, numbness, weight loss. I live with it every day. The illness that I'm suffering from is an anxiety disorder, and it deserves to be treated like any other illness. But it's not.
Whether you're on the go or listening on your cell phone, tablet, or laptop, you can find the show in the iTunes, Google, and iHeartRadio platforms.
With all due respect, I believe this is going to be our finest hour.
Just search M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition, and get ready to be inspired and motivated to harness your ambition.
All right, everybody, welcome back to M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition, episode 47, Shine Bright, See Gaslighters. Before we jump into the 6 types of gaslighting, I want to revisit understanding outcomes and versus intentions, because it's something really important I want you to pull in your toolbox. But there's a couple things I want you to really remember as you're using these tools. 1, if an outcome is bad, I want you to reflect on your intention. Remember, my grandma had the best saying ever: think twice and speak once. You may never say something with the intention of offending someone, but it doesn't mean that still can't be the outcome. So if something bad happens and you're like, but that wasn't my intention, reflect on what your intention was and then how it transpired into the situation with the person. 2, after you do that reflection piece with this tool, if you do not understand why it's bad or wrong, then ask the person that ultimately has the issue with it. Like, so we had this situation and I don't exactly understand what the situation or what I did wrong. I know what my intention was, which is this, but apparently that's not how this went. Can you tell me what I did wrong? I'm big on not being a mind reader. People often do that to you. You should know, I shouldn't know nothing. If something bothers you, you need to tell me, because I may not know I did something wrong. And it doesn't mean I'm insensitive or remote from the world. We all have things going on in our daily lives in our heads all the time. So my thing is, ask that question. Now, if you get the wrong response, don't worry about it. You tried to be honest and reconcile the situation as much as you could. But ask if you don't know. Don't hold your tongue, and don't try to like rationalize a reason why you think it was wrong. If the effect on that person was bad and that wasn't your intention, here's what's key. And this is where you call it being the bigger person and growing up and just being mature about emotions. And this is where your EI comes in, because you have empathy and apologize for it, but don't minimize their feelings. Say, I'm sorry. That was not my intention. And I'm sorry that bothered you that way. That was never my intention. That's all I can say. I didn't know, and I didn't try it. I didn't mean it. Don't add in weird things like, I don't see why you're so upset about it. That's wrong, because that's gaslighting. But we'll get to that in a second. But understand this. Even if you don't agree with why they explain it, still don't minimize it. Respect they feel how they feel, because this is where the EI comes in. Also keep in the front of your mind the value of your relationships, especially with intentions and outcomes. So if you feel like you have an authentic circle and people that you know that understand you and how you speak, then you know what? Feel free to be you. But don't always be you if people don't know you, because that often can result in poor outcomes. I love when people say, I keep 100 all the time. And I'm like, and you probably have a whole bunch of problems, especially in today's world. Everybody's sensitive about everything. So you have to be mindful what you say. Like, there's plenty of things about how I think and how I feel that I don't share with people in certain circles, but I will share it to people that I feel I can be authentic with, who know me. So just be mindful. Just because you're not okay with it doesn't mean that you get to just put something out there and think it's okay. Always remember, though, intentions can be good and bad. Keep that in mind. So if something goes awry and you didn't expect it, well, you can't know how someone's going to interpret what you say or do, because we don't always know every moment with a person where they are emotionally and mentally. You might have just caught them on a bad day. Like I said, know the values of your relationship. High value relationships are those ones where you tend to know people. Middle ones are people that maybe are new, kind of, you've known them for a while, but not like long-standing relationships, but you feel really comfortable with them, you respect them, you feel like they can be in your circle. And lower are people that you know, but you can never say you feel really close to. Understand the value of your relationships as you interact with people, because it becomes key in how you should act with your intentions with them. That's one of the most important things. In fact, that kind of sounds like it's an episode within itself, is the value of relationships, how they play out in your life, and everything from your happiness to your despair and so on and so forth. So that's, to me, something that's probably worthy of getting into. All right, so let's get back to, if your light shining bright, you got to guard it from things that want to extinguish it. And gaslighting is one of those things. There are 6 types of identified gaslighting, and we'll talk through each of these. There's countering, withholding, trivializing, denial, diverting, and stereotyping. And as I work through this, I put a bonus one in there that I think is really key. This is a common knowledge, but I got this. I pulled this particular image from Laura Corbett, like a lot of stuff that she does. But we're going to go into these a bit deeper and kind of really explain, what these each mean. And then you can take your personal experiences and you can say, I think I've experienced this. Or you may say, oh, wow, I might have been guilty of doing that to someone when I wasn't that best version of me. Just saying. Hello to people joining this show. Hello to Vernon Fairley, always tuning in to the many versions of Maya. I saw the title, and for some reason I thought that Rihanna was in this one. No, she wasn't available today. But she said, Maya, shine bright like a diamond. Exactly. Thank you for tuning in. Of course, Charles, Edward, Bingham, Mix, David, Senior, good afternoon to you as well. Just like these fellows here, you can post a comment in Facebook and YouTube, and I can share it with fellow listeners as well if you want to kind of share your thoughts on the situation. So thank all of you for weighing into the show. I always appreciate things you have to say. So the 6 types of gaslighting. So the first one that was on obviously that diagram talks about countering, which AKA is known as questioning your memory. And a person will make you think, their goal is to make you think that what happened, your version of it's wrong, or something that you said you didn't say, or they'll change it around to how they want the situation to be. Another term for this particular type of gaslighting would be the spin doctor. And I don't mean the band. It's that person that totally sees things from only their perspective, and they're going to twist it around as much as they can to be accommodating to that. So when you're in a situation and you're like, nuh-uh, and you're like, I was there too. What are you talking about? Mind you, I said there's different perspectives of things, but I think we're very aware of what we said. And don't let someone back you into a corner and make it seem like you did or did not say something that doesn't fit into how you remember the situation. Don't let them make you think your memory isn't pristine enough to really recall what happened. Another type of gaslighting, the second type, is withholding. And this is when, let's say something happens and a person refuses to speak to you about the situation because they feel you are totally wrong, you're misguided, you should know better, or that you should be able to read their mind. That speaks for itself. And I'm going to say this. We all have probably been guilty of, I think this is that best time of when people get in their feelings and they lose perspective and they're not using EI and they're not willing to listen because it's all about, I'm not hearing what you say. If you can't agree with what I said it is, then what are we talking about it for? If both people aren't willing to engage in a conversation and hear the other person's perspective and maybe why they felt a certain way or what their intention was versus outcomes, then it's not a conversation worthy of having, because you already know that what you want to introduce into the conversation is going to be disregarded. And if you feel disregarded, it's not worthy of having a conversation. The third type of gaslighting is trivializing. And this is pretty simple. It's when a person belittles your feelings or blatant regard to them. So it's like, I don't care how you feel about this. This is me. This often happens when people have kind of taken ownership and they're self-advocating. They get so deeply rooted into it, they kind of lose the ability to be flexible, because part of standing firm and standing their ground, especially after trauma or abuse, is there is no room often for movement when people feel that way. It's a growth process. It doesn't mean they can't get there, but sometimes when people really have been hurt, they're like, I'm digging my heels in and I'm not making an exception for anybody. If it's wrong to me, it's just wrong. Unless you live on an island, that's not the way the world works. And that also means you're not really using your best emotional intelligence. The key thing I want you to remember about trivializing is that most people feel that every part of the experience is about them, no more or no less. I'm gonna be honest, that tends to be a no-win situation when people think that way. It's absolute. It doesn't matter what you say, what you do, how you feel, it's disregarded. Denial is another, it's a fourth that is of the six. And denial is pretty straightforward. It's denying something occurred or flat out pretending to forget events or how they happened, like, oh no, or people will remember your transgressions or what you did wrong in a situation, but they clearly will not look away from what they did. So it's all about you being wrong. And I'm going to disregard that I also engaged equally in the conversation or the situation as it unfolded. When people are like that, you have to understand that they're taking that stance of, I'm doing the right thing. I'm taking the high road. And you might be looking at them like, I'm not exactly sure where you were at when this happened, but I clearly recall you saying this and you doing that. And they'll be like, I did not. It's like, okay. Or they minimize what they may have done that was wrong or inappropriate in the situation. Diverting is the fifth of the six types of gaslighting, and it's changing the focus of the conversation or the situation to entirely their perspective. So a key thing is they will question your integrity, your character, and refuse to acknowledge your perspective or intention in any way. You say, well, what about this? Look, it goes from what you took issue or exception to, and it goes right back to them, because everything has to be about them. Remember, gaslighting is about me doing things with the intention of my personal interest, which means I'm going to disregard you in every way, shape, or form. This to me is dangerous because these last two, because when a person insults your character, your integrity, like they question you, like, well, what you did was wrong and that makes you an awful person or you're a liar. If you know that not to be you and you're like, okay, hold up, pump your brakes. I understand we had a disagreement, but now you're going too far. Now you're pushing the envelope. Now you're really going to a place where I have to really pull out my EI and not act out, because now I don't want to respond. I want to react, because it's easy to reach and get the petty and put the petty out on the table. And this is that growth point when you learn to stop putting petty out on the table. That's when you've hit a milestone in your maturity as a person. When people are doing things and you're just looking at them, or you're like, I'm not doing this. Miss me with that later. Okay, if that's how you feel, that's totally on you. Not doing it with you. The sixth type, which is interesting to me, and I think it's equally as dangerous, 4 and 5 really bother me the most in gaslighting. It's stereotyping. A person will use negative labels to control the narrative. They'll call you names that sometimes can be race or gender related. This is a big part of manipulation. You may hear people dropping the B word, the N word, to really kind of make you feel demeaned or to take you off your mental square. So you get so angry within the scope of the conversation, you lose focus of how you're supposed to be navigating the conversation in a mature and rational way. Because you're like, what you call me? Because for some reason, when we're younger, someone calls you a name, you're like, What? And instantly you kind of just shift to wanting to now jostle with them on this. Don't let stereotyping or negative words like that take you out of your mental space with using your EI. Remember, we are focused on responding and not reacting to other people's poor behavior. And people have poor behavior and want to come back and say, oh, I'm sorry, you knew what you was doing. You did it. I tried to tell you it was wrong when you was doing it. Poor EI on their part. In all this, I came up actually with a bonus type of gaslighting when I was thinking about this. This is a M.A.Y.A ism, so to speak. And I really think this one is key. I call them the camouflager. And the camouflager, they present themselves as a person that you can trust. They listen in confidence. They pretend to be a supporter and use things that you shared in confidence with them against you when it's convenient or an opportunity to manipulate a situation. So you share a situation with someone about something you experienced that bothered you or hurt you, and they roll that back at you in the midst of an argument, or they're gaslighting you. Like, that's exactly why this happened to you, because you're this. Oh, is that the card we're playing? So this is when I told you be mindful of your high value relationships. Make sure you really feel that you can share yourself with people, your experiences, your shortcomings, your mistakes. I can tell you there's very few people that I know that I ever feel that I could just truly be in confidence and share my mistakes with, because most people feel like for some crazy reason that M.A.Y.A doesn't make mistakes. Now, mind you, I will say this, I probably have played into that a bit myself in the image I projected before I became more authentic and said, look, I'm tired of carrying this burden that M.A.Y.A doesn't make mistakes, because I was suffering in silence. I talked about this. I went through depression because I was so busy trying to uphold the image that what I thought I had to be, opposed to just being who I am. And one of the things I learned the hard way is that people will play cards against you that you trust. And this can still be in situations where you feel like you have great relationships with people. So just really be mindful of when you share the most intimate details of yourself with others, that you feel that this is a person that you really can do that with. Because camouflagers, that can kind of put a dagger in, like, whoa, did you just put that back on me? Why are you really trying to pull me away from the center of what the conversation is by trying to make me weak and upset with what you just said? Okay, so how can you handle gaslighters? And this is relatively going to be something that I will tell you that takes time and practice. But the first one I think is always important. One, you have to make sure it's really gaslighting. Here's where you use your intention versus outcome assessment tool to come into play. That I came back at the beginning of the break and said, hey, here's some things of, I gave you this tool, but this is how I want you to use this tool with intentions versus outcomes. Sit back and say, was this kind of more of a circumstance thing, or it just happened that way? Do I think this person really meant it that way? And you have to be honest with yourself. Get out your feelings, seriously, and ask yourself, do you really feel this is what their intention was? Was it intentional or was it unintentional in regards to the situation that happened? Were they trying to minimize or trivialize something just to kind of make the situation go away? Or no, this is a pattern of behavior with this person all the time, so hence what's going on. So once you determine that, I want you to reflect on the situation or the emotion in its entirety. Use your objectivity here. See through your emotional trees. Remember earlier I said you can't see the forest because of your emotional trees. I'm not saying I ever want you to cut any of your emotional trees down, because I don't, because trees are beautiful and they go bright, and they have a cyclical life where, depending upon where you live, I'm going to use me, I'm a Midwesterner, that, trees every year, they go dormant. Their leaves fall off their branches, they die, and then they come spring and they come full again. So just remember that your emotions can be very cyclical, just like trees. But it's important that if sometimes you ever been in a forest where there's so many trees, it's like hard to walk or run. That's dense. When you have dense emotions, be mindful that you've got dense emotions. You may say, I feel like I need to clear out some of these trees because there's no real there's so many trees here. It's choking the life out of other trees to really grow and be tall and be full. Be mindful of your forest and those emotional trees. So, I want you to really think about things objectively. Has the behavior been exhibited before with this person or yourself? We often can be guilty of these things as well, often not intentionally. I know I've maybe done one or two of these before I really started working on myself and wanting to be authentic. I never did it maliciously, but it doesn't matter, because this is patterns of behaviors that people often don't know. So you got to ask yourself, as you're clearing out your emotional trees, be objective. So that part of, intention versus outcome, Was it really that? Or was this really more of just a sidebar thing that happened? But make sure you're thinking objectively, being accountable a little bit of yourself. How much of this did I play into it? Was my attention actually off the mark and I didn't realize it was off the mark? Because if so, I need to be accountable for being off the mark. And I know accountability, we talk about this a million times, but that's just the way it works. Brandy Harris, thank you for checking into the show. I love that analogy, Maya, about clearing out emotional trees. Yes. Nature is one of the best ways I feel you can be so connected with life. You know, I love seasons because literally seasons help you to really kind of think about renewal. The earth renews itself in some places repeatedly. Actually, no matter where you live, the earth tends to renew itself. We get very uncomfortable with natural disasters like hurricanes and tornadoes and things of that. Even an earthquake. I'm going to tell you something. That's the earth being the earth. That's the earth going through its process of renewal and creation. So ask yourself, what is your process of renewal and creation? Have you remained stagnant in this one space the whole time and you refuse to challenge yourself? You should be like the earth. You should learn from the things around you. Renew, replenish. Don't be afraid to shade something off. Cut down some of your emotional trees if your forest is too cluttered. Matter of fact, sometimes you get weeds growing, bushes, because things tend to pollinate and move around, and you may have all this underbrush that you need to clear out of your emotional forest. Take the time to identify what needs to go and what's okay to stay. I know, I'm a walking Maya-ism all the time, you know. 3 ways to really kind of deal with gaslighting. Seek counsel from close friends or family members. Better yet, your friendly neighborhood mental wellness advocate. Or if it's not me, find a counselor. I always think that when you find a counselor, there's a non-biased, non-judgmental person to sit in front of you. I always say though, when I counsel people, like, don't come to me if you think I'm not sugarcoating stuff. I can't. You don't get better if I'm not honest with you. And I'll pose questions and say, what if? And we got to do the digging. You do the heavy lifting. I make sure you have the right form and support. That's what therapy is about. We're not there to give answers. We'll help you discover the answers, but we give you the form and support, just like if you're lifting heavy weight, to make sure you don't hurt yourself. You can really work through the process properly and yield the benefits. You don't yield benefits if you lift weights wrong. In fact, you might hurt yourself. But if you use the correct form along with the right weight, you yield the outcome you're looking for. Mental wellness is the same thing. Don't do unnecessarily heavy lifting if it doesn't serve a purpose, if it's not making you better, that best version of you, if it's not yielding some kind of happiness. Why do you keep doing it? 4, I want you to determine the value of relationships. And I already decided that this is an episode that needs to be next, even though I was supposed to have a guest last week who was supposed to be this week, but I had to do this episode. But I want to bring her on. So the conversation about the value of relationships will not be next week. It'll be in 2 weeks, because I have a great guest I've talked about, Juliet Copeland, who story to me needs to be shared about. If you think the struggle is real, listen to a person whose struggle's been so real. There are times I'm trying to figure out how she does it. I want people to hear her story so you can start to say, I'm not in this alone, but wow, look what she's navigated through all this. But I want you to determine the value of relationship, because this is key. Is it worth the emotional work? Are you keeping this weed or this underbrush in your emotional forest from this person for what? Why are you letting all these weeds populate? If you feel it's a high value relationship with somebody, then I want you to discuss the situation with that person. But I always need you to be mindful that it may not go as you think, because remember, in our emotional wellness journey, everyone's at a different point. I am big on meet me where I'm at, but I'm not going backwards with you. So if I try to approach you in a sane way and you come at me sideways, or you refuse to listen, or you try to make it seem like it's all my fault, I realize at that point, we can't really truly engage in conversation, because if it's not one-sided, it can be no-sided. So just realize everyone may not be where you're at in regards to trying to have that salient conversation and do better. You can only do better with you. You can't do better for others. And when you stop trying to do that, I'd be like, oh, you can miss me with that. Okay, that's what we're doing here. Okay, you let me know. I'm done. No more conversation. And unfortunately, I used to always think that I had this poor emotional kind of connection with people because I could let things go. I realized that was one of the best skill sets I ever had. I was like, Maya, why do you just let things go? Don't. I'm like, you're asking me to fight a battle for what? To keep emotional weeds and underbrush in my emotional forest? I'll pass on that. So with that being said, those are different ways that you can try to deal with being in a gaslighting situation with some. And I'm going to tell you this, make sure they're high value or at least medium value relationships, because if you're doing all this work for a low value relationship, not good. We'll have that conversation in 2 weeks, what the value of a relationship really means. Robarn, checking into the show. Appreciate it. Life doesn't have a pause or rewind, so I only move forward. You got that right. If you remain stagnant for too long, you might have weeds that grow under your feet, and you may miss your opportunity to grow and be amazing and accomplish the things you want because you're working on somebody else's timeline or you're working towards somebody's expectations. Look, work on you. And the thing is, if I can't make everybody happy, well, that's okay, because I got to make me happy. It doesn't mean you should make people miserable, though. I'm not giving you the pass to say, hall pass, go wreak havoc on the world. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying emotional intelligence, you become more empathetic, not sympathetic to people, but empathetic. But being empathetic does allow you to move forward opposed to staying in one spot and not getting the full picture. So final thoughts. I'm going to say this probably every episode so it sinks in with people. Give yourself emotional space and time. Be honest and realistic about how you feel versus what you think you should feel. We talked about the M.A.Y.A-ism about emotional marinating. It's okay to negative emotional marinate for a short time because it has purpose, not long period. A need for you to truly understand intention versus outcome and own where you may have failed to realize the consequences of your actions and words. Accountability is something you don't get to pass by just because you want to. So if it wasn't your intention, acknowledge it, but don't demean or don't make someone else's their emotions not seem relevant. Like, that wasn't my intention. I'm sorry. That's all I can say. And leave it at that. Because when you try to do too much explaining, when you didn't realize you'd done something wrong or that wasn't your intention, you tend to make the situation worse. And if the relationship is high value and it has meaning to the both of you, you will navigate those troubled waters together, because it is through difficulty and troubled waters that we come out on the other side and have richer relationships with ourselves and with others. But if you abandon ship on yourself or others, maybe it just wasn't a relationship that had value. And it's okay, because someone once said, people come in our lives for a reason or a season. Figure out what theirs was and keep it moving. Lastly, begin to understand, like I said, those values, high and low, determinate. Because the key thing is that the effort that you emotionally and mentally put into relationships is extremely important. That's the things I want you to be the takeaways of the show. All right, everybody. As always, I enjoy. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate when everyone supports and listens to the episodes, because the whole purpose of this podcast is to help you to identify your ambition, harness that motivation to help you acquire the success and satisfaction you seek in your daily life, not just that big overarching life. We're looking for daily excellence, daily happiness, daily amazingness. And guess what? Every now and then it might be a little bit, kind of mundane. That's okay too. Remember, you can find episodes of M.A.Y.A on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, so many places, as well as, of course, I'm always going to tell you to go to MA.com and listen that way, because that's, kind of my preference of how I want you to listen to the show. Remember, there is a podcast resource to this show. I have two. I'm going to go add another one that I think will be helpful, because a lot of gaslighting does come from domestic situations. So it's a really good piece that I think is worthy of listening to. So I'm going to add that one in as well to the two that are already there. So go to MA.com, go to podcast resources. You can click and you can listen that way. Of course, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. Subscribe and share. I appreciate when people share more about what I'm doing here. It's always a good thing. As I wrap up the show, thank you to everybody for tuning in. Nick, Paul, a little late to the party, but either way, there's always a space at the table for you. You can't always please someone until you please yourself in a positive way. Absolutely. When you're the best version of you, you tend to do better with others. Let's just be real and honest about that. When you're miserable, chances of you being exceptionally good with other people, not the case. But until next time, everyone, remember, your present becomes your past and your future is no more. So make the most of every day. I hope by now that's resonated and people get what that means. So I want you to be well, stay safe, but more importantly, I want you to continue to be absolutely amazing. I'll see you next Thursday, 2 p.m. Central Standard Time. Spread the word, share the show, subscribe, all those things. Ciao.
You feeling stuck lately? Like life's passing you by? Get to know M.A.Y.A.
Acronym, My Ambition, Your Ambition.
Reconnect with your dreams, your goals, your ambitions. Find your motivation and start to live the life you desire. Explore the M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition podcast at M.A.Y.A.com.